This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 585 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. And on today's show, we are going behind the scenes with Dr. Shauna Swan of Netflix's amazing new documentary, The Plastic Detox. Now, have you seen the documentary yet? Have you watched it? If you have, you already know that it's quite phenomenal. If you haven't watched it, you should definitely stop everything and go watch it. But the film follows 6 couples with unexplained infertility. So they have been trying to get pregnant for at least 2 years. They're having no luck, and the reason is unclear. And so the film follows these couples as they seek to lower their exposure to plastic in hopes that doing so will have an effect on their fertility and hopes that it will help them conceive. Now, Dr. Shauna Swan, she is the environmental epidemiologist who guides them as they embark on a 90-day plastic detox. They remove plastic items from their home. They avoid plastic packaging. They replace synthetic clothing, which is plastic clothing, with natural fiber options. They replace their personal care products with ones that are fragrance-free, because remember, plastic chemicals are not just in plastic, they are in our personal care products, and Dr. Swan makes that abundantly clear in our conversation today. They even avoid touching receipts. Okay, so the couples go on a 90-day plastic detox, and then at the end of those 90 days, we see what happens. Do they successfully reduce their exposures to these classes of chemicals, these endocrine disrupting, these hormone disrupting chemicals? And if so, does it have any impact on their fertility journeys? Now, I'm not going to give away the results, and I will say, too, that the movie does not constitute a formal clinical study. But even despite that, the results are incredibly inspiring. So watch the film. Now, I believe that plastic is the new cigarette. Plastic has been unleashed on a population under the guise of being benign. But spoiler alert, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know plastic is anything but benign. The health effects are wide and far-reaching. They go far beyond microplastic pollution, which, by the way, is a major environmental and human health concern in its own right, microplastics. But I do see a future in which the tide of public opinion completely turns on plastic, just like it completely turned on cigarettes. I mean, heck, it's happening now. It's happening right this second, isn't it? And one of the expert voices in the field that's helping to turn the tide on plastic is Dr. Shauna Swan. She is featured prominently in this Netflix documentary, but she's not just a movie star. She is a scientist with some serious credentials in her own right. Now, I know this is a long introduction, but I have to say, if you're new to the topics of plastics and phthalates and bisphenols and even PFAS, you should probably listen to some of the previous episodes in the archive for some background knowledge here. I've linked to a few in the show notes, and I highly suggest all of them, but one in particular, the one with investigative journalist and author Matt Simon, that will really set you up for this episode. This episode is, I wouldn't say this episode is for beginners. I think you do need to have a bit of a baseline knowledge to be able to fully access all of Dr. Swan's wisdom today. So there's the very long introduction. Dr. Swan, oh my goodness, I am so honored and thrilled to speak with you today. How are you?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm fine. I'm happy to be here talking to you.
Same. The Plastic Detox is quite the film. For people who have been concerned about plastic for a while, it seemed to confirm a lot of our deepest fears. And for those of us who never really thought about plastic and plastic's effects on human health, I'm guessing they were quite surprised. But Before we talk about the documentary and, Netflix and all of that, I want to know about you. I want to know how you got into epidemiology. I want to know how you started studying plastic chemicals specifically. Talk to me about what about all of that interests you.
It's a long journey. So when I got my PhD, I heard of an opportunity to join the California Department of Health. They were looking for one person who could be both a statistician and epidemiologist, fill both of those roles. So I raised my hand and I said, that's me. I'm both, right? So I joined the Department of Health Services in California, which I love because I have a very strong environmental health focus. How can we help people's health? That's really what I care about. And I started a program there on reproductive health in the California Department of Health. And we investigated, for example, a woman who noticed a lot of miscarriages in her neighborhood in Santa Clara County. She did a survey and then she heard about a leak to the groundwater from a semiconductor plant. And it was a huge leak. And it was a chemical TCE leaking from making chips. That's what the company did. All the waste was buried. There were no smokestacks. All the waste was buried, went into tanks. And then it turned out that the tanks were not being emptied. Why? Because they had leaked into the groundwater. So that was an exciting adventure to go from a possible outbreak of miscarriage, what could cause that, to identify this cause. That got me interested in this whole question of environmental exposures and reproductive health. I gradually got interested in phthalates because a colleague of mine asked me as we were flying to Japan on a very long flight and could talk a lot. He said, you should study phthalates. I don't know about you when you first heard about them, but I had never heard about them. I was like, why? What do you want me to, why should I do that? And he said, because they're in everybody, because he's a chemist and he'd been measuring them. Then he told me that in animals, National Toxicology Program had shown that when the mother was exposed to phthalates, which they did through her food and water, then her males were born not quite as masculine. And we can talk about what that means. But that was so important to them that they called it the Phthalates Syndrome. They showed, just to be clear, they showed that when the mother was exposed to phthalates, which are chemicals put into plastic for many reasons, one of them is to make them soft and flexible. When that happened, it didn't affect the number of pups she had or the birth weight, but what it affected was how their genital tract developed. And there were other changes having to do with size and also the descent of the testicles into the scrotum. It was incomplete. So the whole thing was not completed, if you will. And we called that incomplete masculinization.
There's so much to delve into there. On the one hand, you could say, okay, this is just one class of chemicals, phthalates, that may or may not be making males not quite as masculine. But on the other hand, you could say, holy moly, just one class of chemicals used in the creation of plastics is doing this gigantic thing to all of humanity, which is changing the term masculinity for now and for well in the future. You say a couple times in the documentary that you believe that reproduction is a human right, and yet plastic products and the chemicals that are on and within them are quite actively hindering you and me and anybody else who wants to reproduce from reproducing. Before we get into the science, I just want to talk about that. That's huge. What do you say to couples who are trying to conceive, couples who are struggling with unexplained infertility and they want to conceive, but perhaps one of the reasons why they're not is due to the products that we've been sold and we've been told are safe?
Let's track this and let's see if you decrease your exposure to things in your home that contain these endocrine disrupting chemicals, right? So they disrupt the hormone system, the endocrine system. They change it in a way that influences our health because our whole body relies on the hormones that give instructions to every organ in the body. So if that's disrupted, you're messing with the entire system, really. And that was of course, the premise of the film and of the intervention that I undertook, which was, okay, if the products in your daily life are exposing you to endocrine disrupting chemicals, to chemicals that can affect your hormone system, which you need for reproduction, right? What happens if you lessen your exposure? Does that help? Does it help? That's a simple question. You think this is harming this? Let's take it away, see if you have less harm. It's not rocket science. Okay. So that is the thinking behind the film, really. The film has a lot more. It talks about many experts talking about the risks of various exposures and mechanisms and where these things are found and impacts on populations and so on. It's a great film. It has a lot in it. And at the heart is this question beating along. What happens to these couples if we lower their exposure?
And I'll let our listeners today watch the film to find out. I don't want to give the ending away, but I personally was blown away after just 90 days. What drastic results. I mean, in my opinion, the results were, I don't want to say miraculous, but pretty darn amazing. So the film tracks phthalates and bisphenols. Am I saying those right?
Bisphenols. Phthalates is good. Bisphenols.
Bisphenols.
And those are classes of chemicals. They're not single chemicals. And also a class called parabens, which didn't figure heavily in this. The thing about the phthalates and the bisphenols is that they affect a class of chemicals called steroids. And those are the hormones that we need for our reproductive system. And I think of them as phenols are the evil twin of phthalates. So phthalates make plastic soft and they lower testosterone. And the bisphenols make plastic hard and they increase estrogen. Okay, so they sort of reflect opposite in a way. And they are interdependent, these changes in estrogen and testosterone. And they're both needed. People think testosterone is the male hormone and estrogen is the female hormone. No, that's only part of the story. I'll just give you one little anecdote because I think it's surprising to people, women particularly. So women so let me go back and say, in order to know what's in your body right now, how much phthalates, how much bisphenols, I would ask you to give a urine sample. And that's because these are water soluble. So they go into the urine. So that makes it very easy to measure what's much easier than having to get your blood and measure what's in your blood. So that's great. And so you give this amount, you give the sample, and then we can know what's in your body. Okay? In our population, one of our 2 large population studies, we did that for pregnant women. So we knew what was in their body when they were pregnant, which is very convenient for what came afterwards. But what I'm going to tell you now is a little side road, if you will, a little surprise, which was we asked them about their sex life. We asked them about their level of sexual satisfaction and how frequently they had sex. Okay. And the women who had higher levels of phthalates in their urine reported less satisfaction and less frequency of sex. So it's not just the male whose libido and sexual activity is influenced by the testosterone levels. But we always think of men who have problems with erectile dysfunction, and they go to the doctor and they say, I need to get some more tea because I'm struggling. And that is happening more and more frequently, by the way, because there is declining testosterone as well as sperm count. So these are the 2 classes of hormones that I've focused on because of their strong role in reproductive health.
Yes, that makes total sense. And yet I also want to just make sure that people listening understand that it's not necessarily only in the plastic bottle or in the plastic baggie that they are being exposed to phthalates and bisphenols. Bisphenols are notorious in receipts I know that the couples that you worked with in the documentary, they stopped touching receipts. That was an amazing moment in the film when the couple was at the grocery store and the cashier went to hand the receipt and the woman said no. But also phthalates too. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're the expert, but I'm under the impression that they are also in our personal care products. They help fragrance stick around longer.
Exactly.
So tell me more about that. People who are listening right now and they are concerned these chemicals are messing with our hormones. A tiny little amount is totally throwing off our entire endocrine system. And yet these classes of chemicals are everywhere. Talk to me about that scary stuff.
Yeah. So I told you that phthalates make plastic soft and flexible. But like you said, they also are in personal care products, and they're in there for two reasons. One is they help penetration of the product into your skin. So you put a hand cream on, and his little experiment has been published, by the way, in Denmark. Put hand cream on, you see how much is left after half hour, an hour. It's absorbed. We all know that. That's why you put it on, right? The phthalates are added to increase the absorption of the products into your skin. And by the way, they're also put in pesticides for the same reason, because they help the pesticides get absorbed into the plant. So absorption is a really big thing. And as you also said correctly, they influence the retention of scent and color, also color. So for that reason, they're added to lipstick, nail polish, anything where you get rouge, anything you put color on, you're going to have phthalates in there. And then they're added to fragrances because they help the fragrance stick around, right? So they help retention of various things. And people are surprised it's not just in your bathroom, but it's also any place you're going to plug in that freshener into the wall, the air freshener. In your car, if you're going to hang that little pine cone over the right on your windshield, that's emitting fragrance. If you can, I would say, and that was one of the things that was hard for the participants to give up their fragrance products. But if you can, prefer a non-fragrance product to a fragrance product. And again, back to the study, we got the urine, as I told you, and then we asked women what they used on their face and on their counters and in their laundry, everywhere in their lives. And then we asked, was that product fragranced? And the women who used fragrance products had more phthalates in their urine. It was very clear. So whether you get it from a plastic bottle or you get it from your hand cream or you get it from your air freshener, it's the same chemicals.
As you're talking, Dr. Swan, I'm just thinking about how I'm thinking a couple things, and I'm just going to give my stream of consciousness and we'll see where it goes. Number one,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how and why on earth are these extremely powerful and dangerous classes of chemicals? Like, how are they continuously unleashed on a population? If they're messing with our endocrine systems, they're messing with many things. The film just really, and your work just works on fertility. But they're messing with an awful lot of fundamental human functions. So how is it that these very powerful chemicals are still allowed to be unleashed on us? That's number one. And then number two, I'm thinking about the listener who's tuning in right now and they're thinking to themselves, goodness, if I tried to reduce my exposure to phthalates and bisphenols here, there, is it even going to make a difference, essentially? Like, is not taking receipts or is not using personal care products with phthalates or is getting rid of my plastic cutting board, is it worth the effort, let's say? So why don't we take my first thought and then we'll go to the second one. My first thought, of course, was how is it that all these potentially dangerous, harmful classes of chemicals are unleashed upon us, the unassuming consumer, who assumes that everything that's on the shelf at our whatever store, we just assume it's safe. How is it that non-safe things are there?
That's a great question. And I wish I had a good answer. But what I can say is they're not regulated. If you look at drugs, the FDA does quite well at regulating drugs. After a couple of really serious disasters, which if you want to know, we can talk about, but these disasters which caused missing limbs and vaginal cancers, and they brought these products to the attention of the FDA, and the FDA changed the way they regulate. Okay, so we don't have an aha moment like that for these chemicals. There's not one event that everyone goes, oh my God, we can't have babies without arms born. That was thalidomide, right? And that was very dramatic. But there's not that kind of single disaster. What it is with the phthalates and the bisphenols and the parabens and the PFOAs and the PFAS and on and on and on and on. It's a steady drumbeat of low-level exposures that cause widespread harm, but it's not in one place or it's not an obvious effect. You see what I'm saying? So it's easy to overlook it and say people aren't having children because they're trying later or they want to join the workforce and put off childbearing. And that's the explanation we hear for these things. And I hate to say it, but if there were one really big catastrophe, single big catastrophe like thalidomide, that will get everyone's attention and it will get regulation passed. We don't have that. We have this instead small, continuous, universal effects, not just on humans, by the way. I want to add that animals have also affected. And it is better regulated in some place than others. In Europe, there's much better regulation. And here's a really key difference. In Europe, under a regulation called REACH, if a manufacturer wants to add a new chemical, here's a new chemical, it'll do this and this to my product, I want to put it in. They have to test it for safety first. Yeah. They have to show it's safe. We don't have that. If our manufacturers want to put something in, they just put it in and see how it flies. And testing that, seeing how it flies, means that we see if it harms people. And that makes us the guinea pigs of that experiment that we hadn't actually asked for, hadn't volunteered for.
No. Oh my
That's
gosh. What an answer. I wrote it down because it was so good, Dr. Swan. You said it's an unfolding disaster, but it's a steady drumbeat of low-level exposures. What I hear you saying in that is that it's terrible and horrible and no good and very bad for humanity, but it's not quite bad enough. It's not quite extreme enough.
Yeah. It's the nature of the universal, low-level, ongoing harms that escape detection because we get used to them. And by the way, these chemicals play a role economically in the global economy because they make use of byproducts that would be discarded otherwise. And that's the byproducts of fossil fuel production, which of course is huge. So it's a way to use, and you saw this in the film, I think, a way to use the products that would be discarded in a way that makes money for the manufacturers and harms us. So the harm is not intended, but there it is. That's how these chemicals are made. They're fossil fuel byproducts. They make those little pellets you saw in the movie. That's from fossil fuel byproducts. They get into our clothes and they get into everything in our lives. It's economically feasible, and taking them out would cost a lot of people.
Did you know Fast Growing Trees is America's largest and most trusted online nursery with thousands of trees and plants and over 2 million happy customers? Whether you're planting fruit trees, adding privacy, brightening things up with flowers, or bringing in houseplants, Fast Growing Trees has it all. Even better, they can help you find options that are right for your climate, your space, and lifestyle. Click Order Grow. Every plant arrives healthy with the Alive and Thrive guarantee straight to your door. So if you're ready to get planting, this is the moment. Right now, they have great deals on spring planting essentials, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to our show get 20% off their first purchase when using the code WWO at checkout. That's an additional 20% off. Better plants and better growing at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code WWO at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code WWO. Now's the perfect time to plant. Let's grow together. Use WWO to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Go to growingfasttrees.com for details.
At Great Wolf Lodge, there's adventure for the whole family. You and your pack can splash away in the indoor water park where it's always 84 degrees. There's a massive wave pool, a lazy river, and tons of water slides for your pack to enjoy together. And the fun doesn't stop there. Get ready to explore and play at adventure-packed attractions from Magi Quest, a live-action game that takes place throughout the lodge, to the Northern Lights Arcade. There's also a bunch of great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. And the best part? With 22 lodges across the country, you're always only a short drive away from adventure. So bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Book your stay today at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack.
A lot of money. That's the reality.
Wow. Okay, I'm thinking about whether I want to go down that rabbit hole of the fossil fuels industry being super powerful and trying to stay relevant by, I'm just going to say it, poisoning us, low level poisoning us, but that's essentially what they're doing. I think I'm going to backtrack because I don't want a lawsuit. I want to talk to you about my second concern, which is the fact that I don't think phthalates in particular is in conventional jargon yet. So plastic, though, is. Plastic is everywhere. We can't go to the grocery store without taking home heaps of plastic. We can't order from anywhere. I'll just say Amazon because it's so ubiquitous. We can't order from Amazon without also taking home plastic. And so to that point, I'm curious as to what you would say to those listeners who are thinking plastic is just everywhere in daily life. And not only would trying to avoid it be really darn hard, and my life is already really stressful and difficult, but also it's impossible. What would you say to them?
It's definitely not easy, but it's not that hard because I think once our eyes are open to the kinds of things that convey exposure to us, we start noticing it, then we can start building that response into our daily lives. So I make a big pest of myself when I go around, but I don't expect everyone to do this. But like about the receipt, do you want a receipt? And I go, no. And by the way, you shouldn't really touch that either. Why shouldn't I touch that? I tell them because it will put chemicals into your body that will affect your hormones. Oh, really? Well, that's one person. And I tell them there's an alternative. Just tell them to send it electronically to me. I don't have to touch it. And so if you could find swaps that you can make and you can suggest to people, your friends, your family, I'd go into a restaurant and they'd give me a plastic glass. That's a cheap restaurant, but get a plastic glass. And I'll say, I don't really like to drink out of plastic. Could you give me a cup or a glass or something else? Oh, what? And then we start a conversation. It's interesting. I don't expect anyone else to be making a nuisance of themselves, but you could think about it. Do I really want that, or is there an alternative? And there pretty much always is an alternative, as a safer, easier alternatives. And I think if anyone listening wants to go to unplasticyourlife.com, they can see a lot of things you can do. There's an action. You can click on action, what you could do in the kitchen, what you could do in the bathroom. And in the movie, as I walked through the house of our participants and talked to them about what I saw. And as you look around, you can see there's a shower curtain that's made of plastic. Could we swap that for a cotton shower curtain? There are some kids' toys that are made of plastic. They might be chewing on those. That's not a great thing to do. Let's think about how to. So I've gone through many houses on various shows and movies. And once you open your eyes, you'll see it. You'll see what you have to change. You know how they feel. You know how hard plastic feels. You know how soft plastic feels. Then there's fabrics, which we haven't talked about, but these are chemicals, particularly the PFAS chemicals, are forever chemicals. They're in clothing. They're in our upholstery. They're in our rugs. And there's a really good book that's demonstrated the harms to flight attendants from the uniforms that they wore, which were protected by PFAS. So anything that gives you a barrier, like makes your clothing waterproof, or stain resistant or for firefighters, flame resistant, is going to be putting these chemicals into your body. I just think a large part of it is opening your eyes. But the second part of it is just to acknowledge it's not equally easy for everybody to make these changes. If you are overworked, if you are poor, if you are disadvantaged in a number of ways, you're not going to have the bandwidth to do this. You're just not. You're not going to be able to find alternative products. We haven't talked about pesticides, but that's a whole other class that, as you said, you may not be able to find organic food in your grocery store. You certainly, if you're poor, won't have a farmer's market near you. So there's this gradient of opportunity for change that's related to economic status. And I think that's an important thing to remember because it's not equal opportunity risk.
Really appreciate you mentioning that, Dr. Swan. The poor always seem to bear a bigger brunt of these environmental burdens than those with more economic resources, I think is what I hear you saying. And yet, I come back to the fact that we're buying these products, we're filling our homes with these things on the assumption of trust. We assume that they're safe. We assume that somebody somewhere has done their due diligence and they're tested and they're safe. But what the film makes clear, what our conversation makes clear today is that's not necessarily the case. And so then we get sick with X, Y, or Z, whatever diagnoses, and then we just fund the healthcare industry. That is just such a depressing realization to have as a mother, as somebody who hopes to be around for 4 or more decades. What do you do in your life? You are so inundated with this research, with these findings. Like, how do you navigate the consumer marketplace, which is really just trying to extract our money from our pocketbooks to buy stuff that's going to harm our health, with the reality that you want to live a vibrant and thriving life? What do you do? How do you manage?
First of all, I try not to drive myself crazy. I think people should be aware, but give it a break sometime. Just be easy on yourself because this is hard and everybody should do what they can. I eat organic food. That's just, I can afford that. Not everybody can. I eat organic food. I look at product labels. Now, not everything is listed on labels, by the way, but there's help there. You can go to Environmental Working Group, which is a good place to go for consumer products. They have a guide, consumer guide. You can put your product in there and it'll give you a number, how risky it is. But one of the things I try to do when I go to shop is just buy things unpackaged. Buy in bulk if possible, if you have a grocery store that does that. In the film, I went around a grocery store with one of our participants' children and talked to her, Cecilia. I said, Cecilia, let's play a game. Let's see how little plastic we can put in our shopping cart. That was fun and it was interesting. She was interested. And what we also found, just parenthetically, was that the unwrapped products were cheaper. So there is that plus there. If you can find the place where you can buy a head of lettuce that's not been wrapped up or a piece of fish that's not been wrapped up, you're getting something that's healthier and cheaper. So I bear that in mind when I'm shopping. I try to minimize the number of products I've used on my body and think about what's in clothing. Then when I buy it, try to buy clothing that's not made of polyester, anything with a P in it. But it's not easy, and I'm very short, and so I have much less choice on the clothing. So I would say everybody has to deal with their own challenges. I had several participants say to me, I don't want to stop getting that fragrance product. I really like that. That's a choice. You make that choice. But just know what you're doing. That's all.
I really appreciate all of those suggestions. I'm going to take my children to the supermarket and play let's see how little plastic we can take home. That's such a great idea. I want to play that game and I want to win it.
Yeah.
But what about the reduction versus elimination question? I say on the show all the time, I am a 0 to Oprah type of person. Either it's 0 or it's 120%. There's no middle ground. But I think when it comes to these dangerous endocrine disruptors, a reduction is better than just throwing my hands up and saying, oh, wow, too
Absolutely.
bad.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. That's what I say. Do what you can and don't drive yourself crazy. And in the film, you saw that the participants lowered their body levels of several of these chemicals, some of them to non-detect, which is amazing, but some of them were just lower. So some could do it all the way, some could do it part of the way. We just do what we can. And it's not a static thing. You might learn some things now, and then you see something else, you go, oh, yeah, I could cut that out. Oh, I could also cut that out. Think of it as a learning process where you go on and are more and more health protective as time passes.
Yes.
And you can think about what you're exposed at work, by the way. For example, one of our participants is a construction worker. And so I talked to him and I said, could you wear a face mask to reduce your inhalation exposure? And he thought about that and he did. And he got pregnant. I'm not saying that's the reason, but that's a nice correlate. Think about reduction in your home, in your school, in your workplace, in your car, in your garden. Try to think that these things are everywhere. They're called anywhere, everywhere chemicals. Anywhere, everywhere, all the time chemicals. So, you can always reduce them.
Yeah. Just one question that I don't feel like the documentary covered and that I'm personally curious about in my own life. And please correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am because I'm no expert. But I'm under the impression that older items perhaps off gas. And so older items, I don't know what they're off gassing. I don't know if they're healthier, but I seem to think that holding on to things, whether it's clothes, whether it's, I don't know, toys, I don't know what it is, but I'm under the impression that if I hold on to it longer, it may be less dangerous to my health than buying a new shirt or a new synthetic polyester shirt or buying a new set of plastic blocks for my children. Does that have any basis in reality?
First of all, I cannot speak about all products, but I would say certainly washing things is a good thing to do, whether it's your food or the blocks that you buy your kids or your shirt. Washing them before use will definitely get rid of some of the exposure. Heating, by the way, we didn't talk about that, but heating, anything that's going to go into your body is going to make it worse. So if you're going to heat your food in the microwave, don't do it in plastic. Do it in glass. It's not hard to save your old glass jars. That's what I do. Save your old glass jars, use them for storage, for microwaving, but don't use the plastic container that they came in. So there's a matrix, a shell, if you will, in which there are plasticizers that are added to give the product its softness or its hardness or other properties that the manufacturer wants them to have. And those, like the phthalates, are not tightly bound to the matrix that they're put into. So when you heat like food in plastic, they come out of the matrix and hop into the food, which is an easy target, and then they go into your body. I don't think you'd call that off-gassing, maybe, but it's movement of particles of harm into another environment. And don't let that be your food.
Yeah.
Or your water, or yeah.
That's helpful. And so for anybody listening who is like, oh my goodness, my home, my environment is filled with plastic and these groups of endocrine disrupting chemicals, if you could name just a handful of where they should start, what would you say?
I would say start with your kitchen and start with your fridge. Just look in there, and once you start looking around, everybody, even my fridge too, there'll be things there you'll go, wow, why do I have that in here? Do I really need that in this container? Do I really need that to be covered with plastic? Do I really need this to be in a plastic bag? I would start with that, because the three ways we get these things: we ingest them, that's eating and drinking. right? Dermally absorb them, personal care products or other products coming from the air, or we breathe them in. If you want to think about this, not all the time, you make yourself crazy, maybe a couple times a day, just think about when you're going through your daily activities, you could say, what am I using now that's exposing me? Is it something I'm putting on my face? Is it something I'm washing my clothes with? Is it something I'm washing the counters with? Something I'm washing the floors with? Something in my car? And so on. So they're everywhere. Anywhere you look, if you want an easy find, just look around your house. You will find a lot of these chemicals. Yep.
I mean, I'm equal parts inspired and demoralized, Dr. Swan, I'll be honest. There's just a lot. There's just a lot here, I think. We didn't even talk about PFAS, and the
Voice
Dr. A
did,
didn't
yeah.
either, but
Yeah.
any thoughts there?
I mentioned the clothing and the flame retardant clothing, and then that same chemical, which I like to think of as a barrier. So a barrier between the rain and your skin, a barrier between dirt and your skin, or a barrier between when you have in a pizza box, there's oil and it's keeping it off of the cardboard, right? Anything putting a barrier, a Teflon pan, those barrier chemicals are bad in a different way than the phthalates and the bisphenols. And one of their major harms is that they affect your immune system, which is really important. Your response to vaccines, your response to germs, your response to everything. And minimizing exposure to PFAS is probably more difficult than minimizing your exposure to phthalates and bisphenols because the products are more permanent. What covers your sofa, how are you going to get rid of that? What covers your floor, they're going to stick around for a while. You can get rid of your takeout container or throw it away, never buy that again. But it's harder with your clothing and your upholstery and your curtains, and all of which could contain these chemicals. Your frying pans, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, I don't want to say it's a criticism of the film, but it's a criticism of personal responsibility in general, which of course is that the onus of responsibility is on the consumer to avoid these things. And yet they're so pervasive and they're so everywhere. So this podcast once operated from a place of, oh, we'll just do this and we'll swap this and we'll just not buy this and then we'll be great. But the longer I do this, the more I realize that it's not the consumer's fault. It's not your and my fault if we're exposed. We're exposed by default. And so it's really not on the consumer to do anything. It's on our lawmakers to protect our health. And I welcome your thoughts here because lawmakers are not protecting our health at this moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would say it's not only on the lawmakers, but it's also on the manufacturers.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
and there are alternatives. Sometimes they're more expensive. Sometimes it means a lot of work to find a safer alternative. I've been working on some projects like that myself and realize how hard it is to make these changes, to change from plastic to glass. And when I dive in there and see, yes, it's really hard. I can appreciate how hard it is for these manufacturers to make these changes, to still sell their products, to still have them serve the purpose they're supposed to serve and be free of harmful chemicals. That's difficult. On the other hand, the manufacturers are also people. They also want kids. They want their kids to be healthy. They want to be healthy. So they should care about this as well. So we all have to care about it. And it's not our job as consumers to do this. On the other hand, given that it's not being taken care of elsewhere, I would say it's by default our job. It shouldn't be our job, but it is our job now.
I love that. It shouldn't be our job, but no one else is stepping up, so it's now our job. And
Right.
here we are. We're having these conversations and we're raising our voices. Dr. Swan, I thank you so much. Tell my listeners where they can find, of course, the documentary, but also you and your work. Where can we find it all online?
Oh my goodness. The documentary is a Netflix documentary, and thanks to Netflix for this wonderful campaign to get this information out. Where you can find my work, you can just go to shaunaswan.com and see what I do. And as I said, go to plasticyourlife.com if you want specific information about products that you're interested in checking out.
You know what's so cool to me, Dr. Swan, is that in 30 to 50 years, the population is going to say, oh, thank goodness 20 to 50 years ago, people stood up against phthalates and bisphenols and PFAS and all of those terrible groups of chemicals that were on and in that terrible material called plastic. Thank goodness people sounded the alarm. And you're one of those people who are sounding the alarm. So I want to just thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for speaking to me today. I learned so much from you. And thank you for spreading the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was a pleasure talking to you, really. Yeah, it was great.
Listeners, that's a wrap. My friends, show notes are at mamaminimalist.com/585. And I want to just quickly come back to a point that Dr. Swan made that really just made me tongue-tied. I'm never tongue-tied. I always have something to say. But when Dr. Swan said that phthalates and bisphenols are fossil fuel byproducts, first of all, I didn't know that. I was shocked to learn that, just as you perhaps might have been. But also, I needed to do more research before I went down that rabbit hole. So I did that extra research. And yes, of course, the expert, Dr. Swan, is correct. Phthalates and bisphenols, phthalates in particular, are derived from fossil fuels. They are produced from petrochemical feedstocks. So these plasticizers are another fossil fuels byproduct. And on the one hand, that seems obvious, right? Plastic is a fossil fuel product, so aren't phthalates as well? But on the other hand, how interesting is it that phthalates in particular are being added to personal care products? Phthalates, of course, being another product that can then be sold to personal care manufacturers so that the fossil fuels industry can make a little bit more money off of the extraction and selling of fossil fuels. It really, to me, is just another way in which our dependence on fossil fuels is harmful to the planet. Yes, and the burning of fossil fuels, that's contributing to global warming. And global warming, of course, contributes to climate change, but also in the human health aspect. Extracting fossil fuels from Earth's core and burning them to power our cars and planes and lather on our body to make our fragrances last longer. Like, it's not good for anybody and anything. So what's the take-home message today? The take-home message is, avoid plastic as best you can because nobody's doing it for us. But also, what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is not to get rid of plastic. The ultimate goal is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So book club for my book club members. We are reading Start in Your Own Backyard. We're reading it in preparation for our April 27th, that's a Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern meeting. Steve Nygren, the author, will be joining us. Yes, so it's always fun when the author says yes to my invitation and decides to come. So come with your questions for Steve. Be on the lookout in your email for, the Zoom link and all that. I will see you then. Reach out if you need me. You can always email me if you want to be in book club. Would love to have you. And this is a super long episode, so if you're still here, thank you so much. We'll be back next week where we are talking about our 3 core needs and how we can set our homes up to meet our core needs. So not setting our homes up so that they look pretty, setting our homes up so that our core needs are met. That's next week. I'll see you then. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out if you need me, and take care.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.